It is all part of the culture of law enforcement, the brotherhood of blue. As our next guest, Redditt Hudson, former cop at the St. Louis Police Department, recently wrote, cops were not being held accountable for their actions, and racism on the force was rampant, quoting Mr. Hudson. One example, a couple of officers ran a website called St. Louis Cop Talk, where officers could post about their experience and opinions. At some point during my career, it became so full of racist rants that the site administrator temporarily shut it down. Cops routinely called anyone of color a thug, whether they were a victim or just a bystander. Joining me now is Redditt Hudson, former St. Louis cop, who now chairs the board of the Ethics Project, addressing the criminal justice system. Redditt, you had a great piece in the Washington Post about your time being a police officer. Why'd you enter the force, and why'd you decide to leave?
I entered the force largely due to the fact that I saw it as an opportunity to help in the community from an empowered position with access to resources. And in many respects, it was that. Ultimately, though, Chris, I had to leave the department because I became so profoundly disillusioned with the criminal justice system in the United States and the behavior of some of my fellow officers in particular. I no longer wanted to participate in the front end of a system that was so characterized by severe inequity, much of which had been legislated into it that resulted in the targeted enforcement that I saw. I didn't want to participate anymore. And it was interesting to listen to you describe Witness 40 from the grand jury. I myself, with other people, also talked to witnesses to the Michael Brown shooting, credible witnesses. And there were other inconsistencies with not only Witness 40, but with the police department in Ferguson itself. I was in a room when Chief Jackson said in words to myself and others from other organizations that Darren Wilson had no knowledge of Michael Brown being allegedly involved in a robbery prior to his encounter with him. The chief told us this. Somehow, between that statement and the time information is presented to the grand jury, Darren Wilson suddenly creates an awareness at some point during the encounter that Michael Brown was allegedly involved in a robbery. Darren Wilson doesn't process, he processes his own evidence. The scene was not properly processed. He didn't call the shooting in initially. There were so many circumstances that would have allowed for a grand jury, had it been properly directed by a prosecutor that meant to do his job, to at least send this to a jury, a trial jury. It's really a breakdown in the system, and the black community and communities of color consistently are suffering due to the lack of integrity in the system that we have right now.
One of the issues that I think this all raises, and the piece you wrote raises, is how internally police and law enforcement officers deal with bad actors among their ranks. I mean, you talk about hearing people say really nasty stuff, witnessing officers violating people's rights. And the question is, what is the culture like that you experience firsthand in how that's dealt with? Is it sort of you look aside, you call someone aside and say, you know, that guy's bad news? Or do people just sort of go about their business and allow those people to fester?
I think it's the latter. Generally, it's not dealt with. I mean, that's the luxury that officers who abuse their authority have. They're going to be investigated by their friends if there's an allegation of excessive force. They're going to be sent on paid administrative leave while that investigation is conducted, otherwise known as a vacation. And when they return, because everyone involved is so indoctrinated in that culture of protection, in that culture of not only protecting the officer, but protecting the larger narrative that officers can do no wrong. We put our lives on the line every day. How dare you ever question what we do? There is no real accountability. And internal investigations are something that I have very little, if any, confidence in. You name an entity for me that you trust to investigate itself, particularly when there's punishment or possible liability at the other end of that investigation. It doesn't happen. And I really want the country to know. You've been looking for the last 100 days at Ferguson, now New York. I want the country to know that, yes, law enforcement is a difficult job, and there are many people in it trying to do that very difficult job. But the number of people in law enforcement, as we've seen, who will knowingly and maliciously violate your human rights, civil rights, and civil liberties is far too large for us not to have a response to them, a meaningful way to hold them accountable fully for what they do to us.
Redditt Hudson with strong words. Former